Good afternoon. The sun is shining, finally, at last, and welcome to the latest episode of Have We Got Planning News for You? Can I start by reminding viewers that instead of a registration fee, we invite you to consider a donation to charity. There's a whole range of charities listed in our website, which sets out the charities that we support, or, of course, please consider a donation to a local charity of your choice. Now, we're delighted this evening to be about to welcome Simon Wicks, the Deputy Editor of The Planner. Simon, it wouldn't be Have We Got Planning News for You if there wasn't an occasional technical gremlin. Thank goodness for Rob, those happen literally all the time, because our collective IT IQ is probably in the minus numbers. But whilst we wait for that IT glitch to start, let's introduce the usual panel. I should say, perhaps, in advance, that the theme Simon has chosen, which will, I presume, explain certainly what's behind Paul's backdrop, is our first jobs. So, Mary, as always, how are you doing? Where are you from? And tell us.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I am sitting in a beautiful listed building called Shaw House, which is just on the edge of Newbury, where for the last couple of days I've been attending the West Berkshire local plan examination. Some local plans are being examined. So lovely to see you, Mary Cook from Town Legal. The water's good.
Very good. Paul, you're going to have to got some explaining to do. Good to see you.
Nice to see you too, Charlie. The waters are always good in the River Derwent in Matlock Bath. When I was told that the theme for our about-to-appear guest was first jobs, I had two choices, one of which was a photograph I sent to Rob, but I don't know if he's able to bring it up. Yeah, there you go. That's my obvious first job from a photograph that my mother sent me quite recently. I think I'm a member of the post office.
That is charming. That is charming, Paul.
It's amazing how they can touch up black and white photographs with.
Oh no!
Here he goes.
Postman Pat in red.
Exactly. My sister's a nurse on the other one, but I don't have her approval to show that. But my first actual real job was and in that building there, which was Pettit's newsagents on the frontage in Matlock Bath, where I had a newspaper round when I was 10. Wandering around the streets of Matlock Bath at 6 o'clock in the morning, earning literally pennies.
Fantastic, Paul. Chris, nice to see you. You and Mary obviously both got the memo about dress code this evening. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. My internet's not great. I don't know if you can hear me okay. Presumption first job was scaring birds at an airport. So there he is. My first job was making the start button on a vacuum cleaner. They used to make vacuum cleaners, my first sort of proper job. And I was on a 12-hour night shift in the Vax factory in Droitwich, making the start button to put on a vacuum cleaner. And I can tell you, 12 hours in a factory is enough to make anybody left wing. So I am not drinking proper job. I'm drinking Lucky Saint because I feel very glad about the job I've got.
Fantastic. Hello, Simon. We'll complete the round of team intros and come to you. So, Sasha, nice of you to dress up for us.
Thank you very much. I'm very well. I'm in London. I've got my lucky tie on because the next 10 days I'm going to see Arsenal win the league. So I'm very happy at the moment. And I just thought I was going to do my Paul Tucker Monty Python sketch about who's got the saucer and who's got the cup. So I'm going to show you, hopefully Bob will get up, my first job.
Uh-huh.
There we are, the night I was called to the bar, the night they tried to shut the doors to the inner temple dining room to keep me out and not allowing me to be called, but there I am, October 91.
Fantastic, Sasha. Well, I can't show you any photographs of my first job because it was in a newsagent in a part of Birmingham called Marlborough, round the corner from where the famous Tracy Andrews road rage murder happened. Unfortunately, due to the area where I was doing this job, the two main things I sold were cigarettes and pornographic magazines, neither of which I'm able to show on screen without getting into trouble. That's what I did in my youth. Selling, not buying, I hasten to add, in both respects. Now, let me welcome Simon. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. we've already explained that your theme of first job, so I'd love to hear about that, why you've chosen that theme, and also where you're calling us from and what, if anything, you're drinking. I'm on the Diet Coke myself tonight.
Okay. So I'm calling from home in southwest London. I'm in the spare room come office come general storage area, so it's a bit of a mess. My first job, this is a jar of coffee beans, because with discount the paper round and mowing people's lawns for money. My first job was a Saturday job in a shop in Guildford High Street called Importers. And Importers was this wonderful old-fashioned sort of tea and coffee emporium where they sold teas and coffees from all over the world. And I used to stink of coffee. We used to roast coffee in the shop in this big roasting drum and pump the scent of roasting coffee into Guildford High Street. So it's sort of where a lifelong love of coffee began. So that was my first job. I've had so many others, it's not worth going into. I'm drinking Left Zero from a Belgian beer.
Oh, fantastic. Great stuff. Well, Sasha may yet go into some of your other jobs in the interview that we're going to conduct with you in the second half of the show. As I say always to our guests, feel free to comment on the cases or the news that we're about to delve into before your interview, but equally don't feel any obligation to. And with that, Mary, over to you to take us forward with the news update.
Well, thank you very much. In no particular order, but I confess I've got to give Tim Burden credit for this one, because he told me today, as we were just closing the examination, that there have been some councils which have been put on the naughty step, which I haven't grasped because I've been deep in this local plan examination. But he told me that Wealdon had been put on the naughty step. So I wanted to send my commiserations to the hardworking Stacey Robbins. But I've also done some Googling and discovered Lewis are also on that naughty step. And I confess there may be more, but I've been distracted by other things. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention. The second thing I wanted to mention was an update to the planning practice guidance from the 1st of May on biodiversity net gain, which is really, some people might be thinking that this condition, the new statutory condition, is going to be imposed like ordinary conditions. No, it's not. It's actually in the form of lots of information that the government wants councils to put on notices, and all of that detail is spelt out in the new planning practice guidance. Also wanted to draw attention to the Brookgate decision in Cambridge, because I think that's really interesting in terms of where it got to on water scarcity. And I want to recommend my fellow partner Simon Wicks' blog on that, which you can find via the Town Legal website, everyone. Well worth reading. And we're covering other interesting decisions on this show. Secondly, I wanted to draw attention to the fact that 2 days before his election, Sadiq Khan dropped his opposition to development on the Greenbelt in order to align himself with the Labour Party's Grey Belt. So I thought that would be a positive for all of you chaps to think about in terms of Grey Belt, because there definitely are some grey sites around London, let's face it, which are potentially ripe for redevelopment. And then slightly less arresting perhaps, but it depends on the nature of your practice. Again, more changes to Class MA in relation to permitted development rights, a little bit easier to gain prior approvals, and a loosening, I would say, or an extension, shall we say, of permitted development rights in relation to agricultural buildings. So all of which are more generous. So that's really it in terms of the update.
Thank you very much indeed, Mary. And without further ado, Paul is going to take us from that to the Court of Appeal.
Before I do, Charlie, just on one update, I was told by a house builder client early on this week that we should all go and dip our toes into the Scottish Court of Session decision in Miller against Scottish ministers. I haven't yet done so, but apparently it's an interesting read. So I was told that, and I said I'd plug it, so I plugged it. However, without any knowledge There's probably some really embarrassing gag in the middle of it. I don't know. But the case that I'm talking about is Caldwell against the Secretary of State, which is a decision of the Court of Appeal from a couple of days ago. The lead judgment is by Sir Keith Limblom, Senior President of Tribunals. I'm not sure whether we can still say Lord Justice Limblom or whether we call him Sir Keith. So that shows my legal ignorance in this matter. So, but anyway, he gave the lead judgment. It's the case considers an unauthorised dwelling in the metropolitan Greenbelt on a site close to Pyebush Lane near Beaconsfield. There is an interesting thing about this case, which is at the very end of it, there's an epilogue, and it's the first time I've ever seen an epilogue in a case, but I'll come to that in due course because it's a good read. So it deals with Mr. Caldwell, and Mr. Caldwell, for most of the 1990s and the teens, sought to secure planning permission on his land, just off Pyebush Lane, for a dwelling without any success at all from Buckinghamshire or its predecessor authorities. But having failed, he got a firm to build a house between 2013 and 2014, which he then named the Goose House. I'm sure there's a pun there, but I can't work it out what it is. But it stands in the appeal decision throughout as the Goose House. And also constructed various other structures. Now, although the report indicates that he did try to conceal the existence of the Goose House, there was a complaint in January 2014 about the existence of the Goose House. So the issue of concealment, which would allow the authority to essentially say that time runs not from the date of completion, but from a later date when it became apparent, they couldn't rely upon that. So an enforcement notice wasn't issued against the change of use of this land until February 2021. Why only against the change of use, you may ask? I should not fail in panto. Why only against the change of use? Because the operation...
10 years.
Oh, no, it isn't.
Oh, yes, it is.
As of the 25th of April, yes. We should have practiced this, Mary. I've now ruined the epilogue. So anyway, the operational development, the time period is 4 years for operational development. For breach to planning control comprising change of use, the time period is 10 years. So it's the age-old story, which has troubled the courts now on a number of occasions about, well, if your change of use is unauthorised, what about the operational development that facilitates it? Well, that problem is going to go away because this is the epilogue, because Section 115 of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act introduced a unified 10-year period, as Mary's just told us, for everything. But that doesn't apply to any breach of planning control up to the 25th of April. So the courts make the point in the case, and I think it's a really shrewd thing that Sir Keith has done, to say this case will have application for at least the next 6 years and potentially for longer. It's the sort of exam question you can see coming up in due course. So there's been a series of cases in relation to this issue. The outturn of it is that when this came before Mrs. Justice Leven, she quashed the decision of the inspector because the inspector concluded, based upon a case called Murfitt and the Secretary of State, which involved heavy goods vehicles parked on a hard standing, and the inspector's decision to say, get rid of the hard standing and the change of use, even though it was more than 4 years old, was held to be part and parcel of the breach of planning control. What was said in subsequent cases, including one involving Sir Keith, was, well, that's unlikely to apply where you're dealing with a complete building. So there are limits to the Murfitt decision. That's why Mrs. Justice Leven quashed the decision of the inspector and send it back to the inspectorate to say that hadn't been properly considered by the inspector. There was an appeal then to the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal very firmly said Mrs. Justice Leven got it right. So essentially the point is that whilst you can say there are ancillary elements, you can say there are some elements which are part and parcel of the breach of planning control, if it's a freestanding element as a matter of judgment, you can't essentially do violence to the Act, which has separate time periods for operational development and change of use. This is the sort of question that should be given to pupils, because it's the sort of thing where you know what the answer is now. It's a clear one, which is it's a matter of judgment. And those are the words of wisdom from Sir Keith Limblom. Thank you very much, Charlie.
In a shock move. Thanks, Paul. Well, I'm next up, and I'm also going to cover a court case a slightly different one to the cases we usually cover. It's a case about climate change. It's a judgment of Mr. Justice Sheldon in the High Court in a case brought by Friends of the Earth, Client Earth, and the Good Law Project, 3 NGOs, are judicially reviewing the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero. The Secretary of State is now Claire Coutinho, but this challenged the decision of Grant Shapps when he was Secretary of State. And the judicial review related to the carbon budget delivery plan, which Mr. Shapps laid before Parliament in March of 2023, following the earlier questioning by the High Court of a predecessor to that plan. Now, the legal context is complicated, to say the least. I can only briefly be summarised in the short time that I have. In essence, following the Paris Agreement on climate change in 2015, which this country ratified in 2016, the UK amended the Climate Change Act 2008 to introduce the requirement for net zero by 2050. The legislation required that to be delivered by, amongst other things, the setting of carbon budgets for successive 5-year periods, beginning with 2008 to 2012 and ending with 2048 to 2052. And the first 6 of those carbon budgets were set in 2021 and were subject to affirmative resolution by Parliament. And the purpose of the carbon budget delivery plan, which was under challenge, was to enable those first 6 budgets, up to including the 6th, to be achieved, pursuant to a duty on the Secretary of State under Sections 13 and 14 of the 2008 Act. Now, the grounds of claim were just about as complex as the legal context, and the judgment is incredibly lengthy. But the essence of the case, the key point I think that viewers ought to be sort of aware of, was the complaint that the returns from various government departments to Mr. Shapps' department, each of those government departments having been tasked with what was called a net zero effort share, in other words, their slice of the overall carbon reduction pie that was to be achieved. Those returns by the departments were caveated by what's called RAG ratings, red, amber, green, reflecting the degree of risk and probability that the projected emission savings will be achieved. And some department indicators of the savings that they've identified in carbon didn't have a high degree of confidence. For example, DEFRA, who largely because of farming practices were one of the ones that had the biggest slice of the carbon reduction pie, the biggest share, DEFRA said in their representation that their emission savings projections generally represented, I'm quoting from them, maximum feasible savings rather than a likely scenario. Delivery confidence is low for many of these emission savings, and scientific uncertainty limits precision. So a bit of a health warning, to say the least. Now, the ministerial submission to the Secretary of State, which is the briefing that in long-established convention, way before this government, and under governments of other complexions too, distills the issues and the matters the Secretary of State has to decide in a codified document. That ministerial submission didn't provide the RAG ratings to inform his decision on the carbon budget delivery plan. And the submission stated, amongst other things, that the following words: "You should note that the quantification relies on the package of proposals and policies being delivered in full. Our advice is it's reasonable to expect this level of ambition, having regard to delivery risk and the wider context." Now, what the judge held was that the reasonable interpretation of this passage, and therefore what the Secretary of State would have understood, absent evidence from him that he took it to mean something else, the reasonable expectation of the ministerial submission was that he was being told by officials that each of the individual proposals and policies that formed the package of carbon reduction measures to deliver the budget would be delivered in full. And that meant that his decision was taken on the basis of a mistaken understanding of the true factual position, because that wasn't what the departments such as DEFRA were saying. They were saying this might not be delivered. We don't have a high degree of confidence. The true position was that not all the proposed policies would be delivered in full. And in light of that, the decision was irrational because it proceeded on the basis that the evidence presented by the departments was something which nobody could possibly have taken the evidence to have said. In fact, it said the opposite. Now, an important note to take from this is it's often said in relation to challenges to Secretary of State decisions, and has been said in relation to this one, including actually in a parliamentary debate I was in yesterday, that this is the Secretary of State's fault. The illustration that politicians have messed up again. But actually here, the legal error identified wasn't really, can't be attributed to Mr. Shapps or the Secretary of State. It was an error in the distillation given to him by the ministerial submission by civil servants who, of course, will stay in place under a new government. So an illustration, one has to be careful about attributing criticism directly to ministerial decision makers when a judicial review has succeeded. Sometimes it's justified, but not always, and the devil is in the detail. So that's my tuppence worth in relation to the climate change judgment. And next up, Chris, you're going to tell us about a decision in the Hertfordshire Greenbelt.
I am. It's one of your decisions, Charlie, and I thought it was quite a good defence of your friends, the ministers. Yeah, I'm sorry about my internet earlier. By the way, the whole house has been using the internet, so I've just pulled rank and taken the internet off them. So this is another Greenbelt decision of Charlie's we're covering, and it's from Sarratt in Hertfordshire. And it is for 83 homes and then 9 new homes, so a total of 92. And it's a greenfield site in the Greenbelt, and it's been allowed by Inspector Matthew Nunn. If we go to paragraph 3, we can see that it was quite an involved process. Look at the dates of that inquiry, spread over several months. It lasted, Charlie will correct me if I'm wrong, 11 days. Yeah. There were 2 case management conferences and multiple site visits, all for 92 houses. I mean, how difficult is it to do development in this country that you've got to end up having an 11-day inquiry just for that size of development? And if we go forward to paragraph 12, we can see perhaps why the appeal was allowed. We've got a core strategy adopted in October 2011. Well, that is before the MPPF came out. So we've got a local authority, Three Rivers, who have completely ignored the MPPF as if it never happened. And the development management policies are obviously the daughter document, as Paul's Wokingham decision reminded us. And therefore, it's not a revisitation through the development management policies of the core strategy figure. And the site allocations DPD was November 2014. But again, we haven't seen any change to the core strategy figure. So the housing completely out of date, the housing requirement out of date, the local needs out of date. Now, obviously, it's a Greenbelt case. It was inappropriate development, and as a consequence of which there was substantial harm attached to that. We know that. That's just a given. But then we look at the issue of landscape and the landscape harm. And if we go to paragraph 35, there was a difference of opinion between the council and the appellant regarding the visual and landscape impact. And it was summarised in the statement of common ground. The council is the view that the development would result in major adverse impact, and Charlie's clients thought it would drop down to moderate in the longer term. If we go to the second part of the paragraph, the inspector favoured the council's position. Overall, I take the view the appellant's evidence has generally underestimated the impact. Now, that's interesting because I had an appeal yesterday from Surrey and Waverley, and the inspector took exactly the same approach in a landscape area. He basically sided with the council in favouring their landscape evidence, but allowed the appeal. And this is a very safe way for inspectors to approach the issue. Don't criticise the council's landscape conclusions, but the benefits of the proposal are capable of outweighing it, and therefore you don't need to wrestle with that. Why not side with the council? Because then they can't complain about the conclusions in relation to landscape if they largely the inspector largely accepts those. So it's a well-navigated approach, I would suggest, where you place more emphasis on the benefits and don't necessarily disagree with the council's assessment of the harm. If we go forward to paragraph 40, we have, it's noticeable that the council's landscape officer didn't raise an objection, observing that the plans for remedial landscaping of high quality. And the general conclusion on both sides was that it was a localised effect. So there wasn't wider effects in the landscape, it was only localised. And the effects within the wider landscape would not be significant. Interestingly, the inspector found it was not identified as a valued landscape. That's different from the case I had yesterday, or the decision I had yesterday, where the inspector took the view it was a valued landscape. But again, valued landscape isn't an impediment to development. You simply need the benefits to overcome it. In this case, therefore, quite a localised scheme, but the inspector accepting the benefits and accepting the landscape impact that the council had identified. Then finally, paragraph 56, the inspector's view about the sustainability of this village was that it was relatively limited in terms of the facilities that were available. Charlie's client's proposals included a new doctor's surgery, and there was consideration there about how the staff and how the patients would get there. But if we go to the second part of the paragraph, we can see there's certainly opportunities, and that's what the policy test is, opportunities for sustainable transport. And we're reminded of the fact that the framework does recognise taking opportunities to maximise sustainability would have dependent on the location. So rural areas, it's always going to be more difficult, but that doesn't mean we don't have any development in rural areas. So overall, a very successful outcome. We must never underestimate winning a very special circumstance case in the Greenbelt. Well done, Charlie. There's been another one today in Dacorum. Inspector Dominic Young granting 135 dwellings. Kings Langley, well done to Guy Williams and his team in respect of that. So we are seeing inspectors recognising when plans are completely out of date, as they are in Dacorum, as they are in Three Rivers, granting planning permission. But the real answer is obviously much bigger sites should be in the plans. This council had a 1.9 years supply, and as a consequence, the shortfall in little old Three Rivers was nearly 3,000 homes, 2,843 new homes short of where it should be.
Thanks, Chris. That concludes Party Political Broadcast by the Chris Young Party. And with that,
getting me back.
over to Sasha to commence our interview.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Good afternoon again, Simon. Let me introduce you to our viewers. You are, of course, the Deputy Editor of The Planner, and in that distinguished role, you obviously have quite a significant influence on debate in the planning sphere. In terms of your history, you were born and bred in Guildford, Surrey. You did a degree at Portsmouth University, and you specialised in dissertation on the Victorian female poets. You wanted to be an academic, but then changed direction and actually ended up at the Surrey Advertiser, where, of course, you did the full gamut of stories of a young journalist, including those involving pets being lost and finding themselves in inappropriate places. You then, in time, started to work for The Planner. You've now taken on a pretty seminal role, I think it's fair to say there. You're officially identified as the Deputy Editor, but those of us that know you know that that brief covers almost everything and anything. And it is important to say that you are quite, instrumental in quite a few of the recent and current campaigns that The Planner runs. So welcome to Have We Got Planning News for You? And I wanted to start off by just effectively give you an opportunity to tell all of our viewers who are involved in planning what effectively is your brief for The Planner. What does it seek to do? And what do you see as the aims of the magazine currently?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me on. So The Planner is, well, my brief is basically to determine a lot of the content. A lot of the feature content is largely down to me. A lot of the opinion content, I help to set the tone of the magazine. I to some extent, the public face of the magazine. That's not through any sort of formal channel. It's just the way it's happened. I'm involved in most aspects of the magazine's production and production of web content and digital content as well. So I do a pretty wide range of stuff, and I'll dip in and out of all sorts of things. So I've written appeal reports, appeal summaries, case studies. Most of my work now, though, is about selecting content, really planning content and commissioning writers and working with writers who may be professionals or maybe members of the profession. And helping them to produce high quality copy.
Mm. And principally, is the audience is it sent to every member of the RTPI? Is it a misconception to consider it the house journal of the RTPI?
It is sent to every member. It is, yes, I think it probably is the house journal, but one very significant aspect of this is that we have a very high degree of editorial independence from the RTPI, and that's a very deliberate arm's length relationship. So we're a third-party contractor. I work for an organisation called Redactive Media, and we specialise in producing media and content and member magazines and events and so forth for professional membership bodies. The relationship between us and each of our membership bodies, it differs from body to body. With the RTPI, it's very much hand's length. We have a good relationship with them. We discuss content with them. Broadly, our role is to promote planning, promote the principles of the RTPI, but not necessarily the day-to-day activity of the RTPI. We will periodically work with them on campaigns, and we'll amplify some of their work. I consider it an important part of my role to help to foster a sense of community among RTPI members, and to give RTPI members a platform to talk to their peers. I would say also that it would be very nice to think that people outside of the RTPI itself and even outside of the planning profession would be interested in picking up the magazine. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the history of the magazine later on, but what we're trying to do is create something that's very external facing, that looks and feels like almost like a newsstand magazine, and certainly is newsstand quality, and is something, a really sort of tangible, substantial artifact that's well designed, that members of the RTPI can basically feel quite proud of. This is my little magazine, and we would like you to give it to other people as well.
Okay, well, in explaining your editorial independence from the RTPI, just tell us what campaigns are you currently involved in through the planner? What is it of importance to the planner, and therefore manifesting itself in current campaigns?
Well, we have our annual Women of Influence campaign, which I think, again, we'll probably talk about in a minute. No. We dip in and out quite often into discussions around recruitment, retention, which is a really sort of critical area of work for the RTPI itself. So on that, we will sort of work in alignment with them. And the next issue has an interesting article about planning academies in local authorities. The big thing for me at the moment, because it's very much a personal thing, is our, quote, storytelling campaign, which has come out of a lot of the research and a lot of the media attention that's been given to planning and planners over the last year or two, which has made it very clear that there's an issue with the way the public conversation about planning is conducted, and consequently with the way that planning and planners are talked about. And many planners, we feel from our surveys and our research, feel at a bit of a loss. They feel a little bit helpless about this. They don't feel they don't necessarily feel empowered to talk back or to reframe the narrative or to take control of the narrative around planning, which has become a very public and very polarized narrative. So with the storytelling, what we're effectively trying to do is give planners a set of tools and inspiration, a way of thinking about how they talk about planning publicly, how they talk about planning at the various points within their work where they engage with other people, whether they be members of the public, developers, barristers and solicitors. And it's a way of thinking about planning in terms of narrative and in terms of telling a story, because actually planning lends itself very well to this. And I think that developing that kind of coherence can help to communicate the aim and purpose of planning more clearly.
But is there not an inference that underpins that we're not actually, those of us involved in planning aren't actually getting the story accurately across, or certainly it's not attractive for those potentially who might be considering the profession?
I think it's more the latter point. It's more to do with language, to do with the way that information is assembled and related. So, for example, listening to your appeal summaries, I would have to go back and read through that 3 or 4 times before I really grasp it. So the power of storytelling, or the power of creating narratives, is you present things in very simple ways that are easy to digest and understand. And you can communicate actions, feelings, and meaning in familiar ways through familiar formats that we're all, accustomed to. I think the primary audience for this is probably, this is really to do with the relationship between planning and everybody, planners and everybody. So politicians, members of the public, potential recruits, that's a really important area. And anybody else who interacts with the planning system.
Now, can we discuss one of, obviously, the campaigns that's probably known to most of those who are watching is the Women of Influence campaign. Well, the annual campaign, frankly, where you identify and name those that are obviously, as it says on the tin, women of influence. Just tell us, first of all, about the evolution of that campaign. How did it come about?
Okay, so you mentioned at the top that my dissertation was on Victorian female poets. I've always worked in industries and environments where there have been influential women in positions of influence and positions of power. And when I came into planning, writing about planning in 2013-14, my colleague Laura and I both came to the same awareness pretty much simultaneously that it was a very male profession. The prominent people within it were male. The spokespeople within it were male. If we ever phoned up consultancy and asked for somebody to speak to comment on a particular issue, we'd always get a man. It was noticeable. It was very pronounced to me. We did a bit of desk research that identified that at the senior end, at the upper end of the planning profession, particularly within private consultancy, at sort of board level and director level, something like 90% of board directors and directors at that point were men, and the 10% who were women were largely in support positions, so marketing, communications, accounts, not the technical stuff. So one International Women's Day, we thought, well, let's try to do something about this, and we just very spontaneously put up and tried to tell us who your women of influence are. And it got this massive response. I mean, it was really quite remarkable. So we did it again the next year, and then the next year. And then we thought, we've got to do something more substantial with this. So we created a nomination form. We asked people to make 4 nominations to give us reasons for people to be on the list. We put together a team of judges. We set some judging criteria. And it's grown from there, and it's become a sort of regular thing that we put a lot into every year. That has a great deal of buy-in from the profession, both in terms of people being judges, but also people making nominations. We get literally hundreds of nominations every year. Beyond that, it's now grown into an annual event where we host a reception, which actually was supposed to take place yesterday, but unfortunately was postponed because of train strikes. But in early June, we'll be hosting a reception for our Women of Influence in Birmingham. And a lot of this for me is about seeking to redress what we deem to be an imbalance in the profession, which we just both thought was a bit odd.
And I think I would say that it's obviously had a major effect on those who have been both nominated and effectively awarded that. I mean, how do you see it evolving in time? Are you happy with the level? I mean, how many do you give a year? 100 identified?
About 50. And I think that's about right. we sort of set the cutoff depending on both the volume of nominations, but also the quality of the scores that we come up with. It gets harder and harder every year because the quality of the nominations is exceptional at times. Where are we going with it? I would like to grow the reception. I'd like to grow the live event and turn that into a bigger event year on year. It's very kindly sponsored by Landmark. Thank you very much, Sasha. We are now speaking to other potential sponsors as well. We'd like to turn it into a reasonably good size event without it becoming sort of too impersonal. I think the really important thing with this is it's a very personal and personable thing that we do.
Now, can I ask you about two things that I think are recurring issues that always come up? Have we got planning issue? The first is the increase in abuse, intimidation and anger in the planning system, which we see both at the appeal stage, at officer stage, and dealings with members of the public, etc. What is your take on that from your exposure to the planning system? What do you wish to say about that?
So this is something we became really sort of thrust itself into my consciousness around the time of the big furore about neighbourhoods and 15-minute cities in Oxford a couple of years ago, where the response to that was just a massive overreaction. I mean, it was totally out of proportion to what was being proposed. And it became pretty clear from that a number of the planners, the people who were actually involved in designing the scheme and implementing it, were being targeted online and in some cases in person. Subsequently, the RTPI ran a survey in Wales which identified this as an issue. Planners, being vilified, basically. We ran a career survey which confirmed this, and some of the stories were pretty horrifying. I don't think it's a massive problem, but it's there, and the fact that it's there is an issue. I think it's something that goes beyond the boundaries of planning as well, but we write about planning, so this is what we focus on. We've had instances of people leaving their jobs because they felt so under attack. We've had instances of people talking about politicians vilifying the planners, even though it's the politicians who actually make the decisions and set the terms of the system. We've had people being talked about, the media blaming planners for decisions made by politicians. I think that there's been a general degradation in the quality of public discourse generally. We've become intensely polarised and stupidly so about a lot of things. We seem to have forgotten how to conduct ourselves in a kind of civil manner publicly. Partly you can blame that on social media, which has a polarising effect. You can blame it on the political atmosphere in the country, which has been really febrile since 2015-16 and really hasn't let up. You can also blame it on lack of understanding of how civic society works. And in a way, I mean, I'm getting into an answer of the big issue here. I think there's a really big issue with civics and what we generally in society understand about the public sector, civic society, government at all levels, how they work, how they operate, what they're for, what their function is, what is a public good, why it matters. All of these things play into this. And again, I would come back to my point about storytelling. Part of that is about educating people.
Thank you. And can I also ask you about the second major recurring theme, which of course is resources, and the resources particularly currently problem in resources faced by local authorities, which was a issue we explored in some depth a couple of weeks ago. I mean, from your contact with those that work at local government, is that a feeling that you share from the stories you've heard from people, what people have told you on the ground in local authorities?
Yes, it is. I mean, our surveys over the last few years would reinforce that point, that many people working in the public sector feel sort of under-resourced and overworked. Yeah. We know there are recruitment issues within the public sector. There's a shortage of planners. We know that in some cases, local authorities are having to be very, very flexible, very adaptable, and very innovative in the way they cope with difficulty and cope with pressure, and the way they sort of bring in new resources and how they do it. But, quite frankly, you can't have good planning unless you put proper resources into it. And you can't have good public services unless you put proper resources into them. And it comes back to this notion of, understanding and valuing public goods. Planning is a public good, so you've got to pay for it.
Something else that we've discussed historically is about diversity in planning. And I just wondered, there is a general view, and I think the statistics back this up, that the diversity of those going into planning, working in planning, doesn't reflect the general population. Again, can I ask your view on that?
Well, it doesn't. All the statistics tell us that. I think that, again, something we hear a lot is that it's important for those who are practicing planning to reflect the communities they serve. I think that's a very good principle and one that should be respected and sought for. We know the RTPI is promoting diversity and trying to attract a wider range of people into the profession. In our next issue, we have an article about local authorities creating their own planning academies, which effectively is taking advantage of things like apprenticeships and apprenticeship levy money to bring a wider range of people into planning training and, put them through master's degrees, put them through a practical training. And part of the aim of that is to reach out to young people who, or not even necessarily young people, who wouldn't necessarily have considered planning as a career or might not even have gone to university. I think when we talk about diversity, we're talking about socioeconomic diversity, as well as ethnic diversity, as well as neurodiversity, as well as disability. I think it's incumbent on the planning system to promote itself more widely, to go into schools, to reach out to areas where, that are kind of uncharacteristic, because planning does tend to be quite a middle-class profession. And also it's incumbent on us as a magazine to illustrate that diversity where we can. I interviewed Sarah Story a couple of years ago, who was the Paralympian, who became the Walking and Cycling Commissioner for South Yorkshire. And she's a really great woman. She's fantastic. And one thing she said that stayed with me was, if you can see it, you can be it. And so that's what I try to take into every publication, is this sense that actually we don't want this to be an homogenous group of people talking to our readers. We want to get a bit of a range of people from different backgrounds, different geographies, different ethnicities, and so forth. And the principle is, if you can see it, you can be it, because we want to encourage people to go forward.
Thank you. Now, can I just ask you about the future? Let's just talk. My final question, can we just talk about the future? Where do you, if you continue to be involved in the planner, where would you like the magazine to go? What are your pet desires, so to speak, for the next 2 to 3 years?
Well, like much of the British public, I don't really like change. So we did, about 18 months ago, we conducted a pretty major revamp of the magazine. We went from monthly to bi-monthly. We increased the size. We changed the design and the paper stock. We turned it into more of a luxury item, alongside which we beefed up our website presence, created a new website and so forth. So I think the near future is about consolidating what we've done, continuing to sort of refine what we have, make adjustments in response to reader feedback, which is generally pretty good. But, we get the old criticism, and that's absolutely fine. We listen to that. I'm keen to explore the digital realm a bit more. We're putting a bit more resource into videos, for example. One of my favourite things is going to events with my phone and interviewing people on the fly, and then putting together these 2 and 3 minute videos with people, which, it's incredibly easy to do this. And this is the thing about modern journalism is, and not even we're all broadcasters, we're all journalists, we're all content creators now. Then I think that all journalists need to really take this on board, because otherwise you're going to be left behind. So it's consolidation. It's continuing to try to create a really good, strong every 2 months. It's engaging with the audience as much as possible. and it's making lots of videos.
Thank you very much, Simon. Right, Mary, have you got a question for Simon?
Yes, I have. Wonderful to hear you speak, Simon. So thoughtfully, if I may say so. My question was really about whether the planner reaches out to those beyond the planners, as it were, and as a publication, are you trying to reach non-planners? Are you trying to reach out to the potential planners, new recruits, as it were? And how do you go about doing that?
So I'm going to refer you here to something very interesting. Recently, and if you check the features section of the planner website, you'll see this. The Hathi Trust, which is a fantastic sort of digital online research library based in the United States, has scanned and digitized almost every copy of the RTPI journal from 1914 to 1993. And it's incredible to see the evolution of the journal from being what was basically just a scholarly set of papers to begin with, being shared with members of a nascent organization, through to something that took on a more internally focused information, internal comms type role, talking about what different branches were up to, who new members were, readers' letters and so forth, but still maintaining this sort of core, very scholarly heart, and seeing it gradually become more open, more externally focused, to the point where it was contracted out. It was always produced in-house until 93, to the point where it was contracted out to a third party, and it became a much more newsy, outward-looking magazine. We got the contract in 2013 and relaunched the planner. It had been called the planner back in the 70s. And a big part of our role is to appeal to people beyond the membership, appeal to anybody who's broadly interested in learning or urbanism in the built environment. So it's really important that we have a product that looks good, that feels good, that is accessible, that's relatively easy to read, that could sit on a newsstand. And we have a few subscribers outside of the planning, the RTPI membership. We also distribute the magazine to a variety of different people, including politicians and other influential people. I'm very keen for members to share their copies. And, if it were me, I'd want 2 copies and say, pass one on. And I think we have a magazine that's very readable and lovely to look at as well. It's a proper artifact, which is a good thing.
I mean, so members of the bar subscribe to a magazine called Cancel, and you can read it online. You can get it in paper, and I get mine in paper. And yes, I give mine to the aspiring young people in the office who are looking to ultimately be barristers, and it's really important. Yeah.
Well, a small anecdote for me. My over-the-road neighbour knocked on our door recently and said, "Simon, you write about planning, don't you?" I said, yeah, you know this. My daughter, who's 16, is interested in becoming a planner. What can you tell her? So I gave her several copies of the magazine, and she was really happy. So, it's a good advocacy tool for the profession, and I think that's one way of doing it.
Right. Hey, Chris, have you got a question?
Conscious of the time, and I was just going to make the observation, actually, that in light of what you're asking, Sasha, Karina Kanda said, "I'm an ethnic minority female planning undergrad student, and we'd love to see more representation." So absolutely spot on with that observation. And I began my career as a planning barrister by reading a copy of the Journal of Environmental Planning Law. I just happened to pick up a copy, and now I'm a barrister. So, yeah, I'm just conscious of the time, Sasha, and I know Charlie's got a question.
Charlie?
Thanks, Sasha. So, when I started my career at the planning bar 20 years ago, planning was seen as a relatively niche area, at least by those outside our profession, with a relatively low profile outside our sector. And yet now it seems to be one of the most high profile and contentious matters of national political debate and discourse. I wonder, what do you think are the factors that have led to our industry rising up the ranks of the public conscience?
So this one is really taxing. It's a really hard question to answer and certainly almost impossible to answer it succinctly. So I'm going to give you a quick list. And my list contains the MPPF, localism, housing targets, alongside the belated realisation that we have a housing crisis on our hands, breakdown of coordination between planning at different scales, underinvestment in systems, while there's an increase in obligations, social media, political weaponization of planning, and what I call Schrodinger's planning system. And Schrodinger's planning system is the creation of a system that on the surface purports to be pro-development, but in practice is putting almost every possible obstacle in the way of development. So politicians can be seen to be promoting development while also lambasting and scapegoating other people for development failing. And of course, planners become very useful scapegoats. I think that all of these things collectively have led to a real pressure on communities. And I can completely understand why people are resistant to change or why they are wary of change. And I think it's really, really important for planners and the planning system to take that on board and to integrate it into its own messaging, to recognize, to show understanding, and to try to take the heat out of some of it. Because, you just can't, the system's paralyzed. It's more or less paralyzed because there's so much strong feeling involved, and we just need to take the heat out of that. And a lot of that is down to how you talk about planning publicly, how you relate its aims, its purpose, how you connect it with everything that goes on around us, because planning effectively is a tool for the delivery of social policy. It's like the grey matter in the brain, basically. It's linking all the different areas and providing the pulses and the thoughts that connect them. And if you take planning away, everything falls apart, So we need to take a lot of the partisan elements out of this in the partisan discussion and recognise it for what it is. It's a public good. It's an essential public good. And without it, lots of things don't function.
Thank you. Fascinating indeed. My favourite TV series probably in the 2000s was Spooks. And aficionados of that series might know the very early episodes. The cover for one of the spies was being a planner, presumably because at that time it was nondescript and boring. That wouldn't be written now, would it?
When we started the magazine, we were really delighted when we saw anything about planning in the media. Now I just want everyone to shut up. Because my favorite TV series is Better Call Saul, which is about a dodgy lawyer. So I hope you don't.
Talking of dodgy lawyers, Paul, have you got a question?
Right, I'm going to go left field, Simon. We're about to run out of time. I live in a house where the Rossetti family used to come and stay on a regular basis. So Christina Rossetti actually wrote one of her poems here. So I'd never actually read it before I moved in, but it's hilarious. It's one of the funniest things I've ever read, called The Goblin Market. I don't know if you... Which is wonderful, hilarious, very raunchy, and I recommend it to anyone. Which of the poems that you have studied from the female Victorian poets would you recommend to an unexpected planning audience?
Well, the first thing is my dissertation was almost entirely about Christina Rossetti. So, poems by Victorian female poets that I would recommend. God, that's difficult. I think probably Birthday by Christina Rossetti. That's a lovely poem.
Thank you.
It's sort of, it was very sweet, but quite sharp as well. Yeah. Can I just say one more thing before we go? So I was thinking, because I like wordplay, and I may have mentioned my favourite thing is writing headlines. Anyway, while I was sort of building up to this, I was thinking, God, it's really intimidating being interviewed by a bunch of barristers. And then I thought there must be a better collective now for barristers. So I looked it up, and actually it's really disappointing. People are quite sort of mocking, and they say things like a bore of barristers or a boast of barristers or a wiggery of barristers. So I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, well, a debate of barristers, an argument of barristers. And I finally arrived at two, which I think work. One is a moot of barristers, or a case of barristers, like a case of fine wine.
Well, I'll take that. I think it's better than a bunch of star. It's what some other people might say.
I think we're like crows. I think it's a murder of barristers.
Or a head case of barristers.
Well, Simon, thank you so much for being such an illuminating, thoughtful and interesting guest. Charlie, back to you.
Thank you, Sasha. Thank you for me too. Really thought-provoking and lots of stuff to reflect on. So good night, everybody. We're back on the 23rd of May. Thank you again indeed, Simon. Take care.
Thank you, Simon.
Hey, Simon.